So this is the second year of the NBA draft where the first round occurs the day before the second round, and as someone who loves the draft, I'm excited for that because we have an entire day to digest what happened in the first round before getting into the second. And so with that being said, I wanted to make this video to give my quick reactions and my first thoughts on how that first round went, talk about some winners, talk about some losers, and I think we definitely had a very interesting first round of the NBA draft. We saw two guys in Maxime Reynaud and Rasheer Fleming, who I was very high on. I had Rasheer Fleming at 12th, Reynaud at 17th on my board, who slid all the way to the second round, as well as Noah Penda. And of course, obviously I had these guys high on my board, but I didn't expect them to be drafted that high. But the second round is definitely somewhere where I think a team will be able to find a diamond in the rough. We saw my guy, Yannick Niederhauser, slip into the first round and be the first ever Penn State first round draft pick. We saw the Brooklyn Nets make 5 big home run swings at playmaking big yards, which I think will be fun for them. We saw Kasper Siakachonis fall to 20th, and so there's a lot of moving pieces that happen with this first round of the draft. And there's one big one that I'm going to say for when I get to my losers, and one big one that I'll say for when I get to my winners. But with that being said, let's get into who I think did very well and who I think probably has some room to improve in this draft going forward. So my first winner of the 2025 NBA draft is the Memphis Grizzlies, and to be honest, it didn't even have to be them. It was necessarily whoever chose this player that I'm super high on, but the Grizzlies ended up trading the 16th pick, Orlando's 2028 first, and 2 seconds for the Reds to the 11th overall pick, which they used to select my guy, Cedric Coward, who I had 8th on my board. I wanted to put him much higher, but I truly believe in Cedric Coward, and it was very nice to see that there's probably a lot of competition about who can draft Cedric Coward because of what we saw the package to be, which was very reaffirming to me as a scout that people in the NBA are seeing similar things that I'm seeing. And regardless of what they gave up, I really love this move, and it likely means that a lot of teams were trying to go after Coward, like I said. And as my favorite prospect in this entire draft, I love the fit for him in Memphis personally, and I really think that he can make an impact for them right away, and I think he can slot in and kind of pick up where Desmond Bane left off. And obviously, since he didn't have too much film at the high major level after getting hurt just 6 games into his last season at Washington State after transferring from Eastern Washington and having previously transferred from D3 Willamette in Washington as well before that, he'll definitely be a lot of a risk. But as I outlined in my big board video, I think the risk is personally worth taking by a mile. Coward has maybe the highest character of anyone in the last 5 drafts, and I think at the very least he'll immediately be someone who can walk into the locker room, be a leader, and set a standard of hard work, which of course will allow him to internally develop his own game further. And I think honestly he can slide right in the starting lineup for Memphis and be a high-level contributor right away as a versatile 3-and-D wing with potential for much more down the line. What I'm excited for Coward in terms of development is playmaking, on-ball creation, because as he's working on his handle, and it's likely to improve because he was playing a big man at the D3 level and now is transitioning to be more of a guard/wing, I really think he's going to be able to step up his game because he has quick reactions, sees the floor well, and still kind of has that hybrid wing, guard, big game to him that I am really impressed by. And I'm very happy to see that he went 11th instead of in the 20s like how he was mocked in boards. And I really think Memphis, who is great at developing talent and is great at drafting as well, found another gem. And I really think they have a player who will be a great piece of a winning team at the very least for a pretty long time. And I also think that he has the upside, like I said, to increase that scoring volume and that playmaking. And I think already he'll be a great piece next to Jaren Jackson and anchor their defense. And if we're talking ceiling, I really think that Coward can be one of those all-star type of players who makes an all-defense team and can really score it as well. And if you look at the measurables, he has a 7'2" wingspan for a 6'6" guard, and he's super versatile, definitely will be a nightmare wing defender, which the Grizzlies love to have in their starting lineup. And I can't wait to see him play in Summer League, and I'm honestly considering booking flights to Vegas because he is one of my favorite prospects in a really long time. And I think this is a home run for Memphis, who is possibly looking to shed salary and retool. And I think they found someone who can come in, help them compete, help them win, and also be a part of their future plans. So great job, Memphis. I know it seems like they gave up a lot, but I think Cedric is absolutely someone who is worth that haul. Okay, so even though the Spurs had a layup basically in selecting Dylan Harper from Rutgers, second overall in the draft, I was still impressed that they were also able to walk away with Carter Bryant. And I think that they put together a really solid duo to come in and fit right next to Victor Wembanyama, Steph Castle, and maybe not De'Aaron Fox, depending on how their long-term plans seem to go. But I think in general, especially with Carter Bryant, who is definitely not the lock that Dylan Harper was, I think R.C. Buford and the staff once again made another great set of picks. When you look at Carter Bryant, he's someone that is going to be an excellent role player at the very least, with, I think, some potential to possibly put the ball on the floor, be a high-level defender. And since Cedric Coward was already gone, Carter Bryant, who was 9th on my board, would have been the guy that I would have taken if I was San Antonio at that position. And so you come away with a player in Dylan Harper who some people are touting as having an all-NBA ceiling, which I am as well, and could be a very dynamic guard that I think fits great next to Victor Wembanyama. And then you pair them with a do-it-all, versatile 3-and-D wing. It just makes a ton of sense. And to be honest, making logical draft picks doesn't seem to be the easiest thing in the world to do as you look at a lot of how this first round went. And so even though it seems pretty simple, I like the idea of Carter Bryant fitting in really well early on, especially when you look at the ages and the salaries, as well as the potential free agency questions of some of their other wings. For example, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson. I think he makes much more sense for them than Jeremy Sohan does. And so simply just adding a player who will space, shoot threes, play defense, and play the right way is the perfect type of guy that you want to throw into the mix and put into a winning situation right away. And I think that San Antonio had an absolute home run stretch of picks to start their draft. So my first loser in this 2025 NBA draft first round is actually the team on the other end of the deal that sent Cedric Coward to Memphis, and that is the Portland Trailblazers. So with the 16th pick in the 2025 NBA draft, Portland Trailblazers selected a player that I had 47th on my board. And of course, while I was probably underrating Han Yang, I still absolutely think that the 16th pick is a reach, no matter what the people on the broadcast were saying. Now, I heard on that broadcast that people were saying they picked Han Yang instead of trying to move back because of the fact that they thought that he would be selected before they had the chance, and so they wanted to take them right now. And obviously, I've heard the stories of Portland's head scout having watched Han Yang 2 years ago in China and really falling in love with his game, but by no means do I think this guy is going to be another Nikola Jokic type of player. People are calling him the Chinese Jokic, but if you really dive into the film, the reason why Jokic succeeds is because he is such a unique player offensively, and he is so smart defensively that his lack of physical tools can be made up. And I have similar concerns for Han Yang when it comes to those physical tools as well. I personally don't think he can move his feet all too well enough to actually be able to be a competent defender in the league. And in order to be a productive NBA player, or at least a role player worthy of being selected at the 16th overall selection, you have to be a competent player. And while on offense, you see the flashes. I watched his draft workout video. Great stretch of passing. The shooting stroke looks like it's been improving, although it wasn't great in his most recent season in China. I just think that not only were there other better centers they could have selected, there were other upside plays they could have made, but they easily, in my opinion, could have traded back to find another player. And I'm not a scout. I'm not in Portland's front office. I don't know what they're thinking. But for a move like this, that's so unexpected, and in my opinion, one of the craziest draft picks I have seen in my time here, they better be right, because if this doesn't go well, it's going to be remembered for sure. But with that in mind, I guess I probably should give suggestions of who they could have taken instead with the 16th pick, assuming, they still trade back. I think Johan Behringer, if they're still trying to select a center who went 17th, probably has more upside than Hansen Young. I think, given their roster, they're definitely in a weird situation where they have a lot of mediocre players that don't really fit well together. So I get the idea of taking a long-term project for eventually when you get rid of those role players, a guy like Hansen Young could flourish and be ready to jump into the mix by then. But, I had Asa Newell higher than Hansen Young. If we're still looking at bigs, I wouldn't have minded me Clifford instead of him. Even Liam McNeely, who I'm not that high on, I think would have been better. Hugo Gonzalez, maybe you could have stashed him. I just don't get it. Personally, I think even if they were trying to go for the win, perhaps, Rasheer Fleming would have been a good option. Kasparis Yakachonis was on the board. Drake Powell was on the board. Plenty of options that they could have done. I think Hansen Young is going to be really fun for them, but do I think it's going to necessarily lead to production is questionable. And for a guy who I really thought was going to be a early to mid second round pick that I personally was just going to be low on and be okay with it, I'm very shocked because I personally, his height and his lack of movement really scare me. Like I say on this channel all the time, big centers who don't move their feet well, I'm always worried about them. And for Hansen Young to be able to be a productive player, he's going to have to be so overwhelmingly positive on the offensive end that it's going to have to make up for some of his defensive deficiencies. Of course, he's a shot blocker, but it's going to be tough. Okay, so my last loser of the 2025 first round is the New Orleans Pelicans. So I'm not really understanding exactly what their trajectory is and what their plans are for the future. After trading for Jordan Poole, they ended up selecting Jeremiah Fears, 7th overall, and taking Derek Queen with the 13th pick after they traded up for him and gave away an unprotected first in 2026. And so they gave away their draft rights to next year's pick in exchange for Derek Queen. And, I had Queen and Fears 15th and 14th respectively on my board, and I really wanted to put them lower. I had them both as stay away prospects that personally, if I were in the draft, I would not look for them. And I think there's a lot of overlapping skills between players already on the roster and what they have. So, I would expect them to hopefully move off of some guys. For example, maybe a Zion Williamson, try to cash in value. And then if you could start Fears and Queen, be a really bad team and just see what develops, maybe I actually could like it. But for now, I'm not a big fan, especially with the overlap between Queen and Eve Misi and Zion Williamson. I just don't like that, especially because I wonder how much he's going to be able to play under Willie Green to start off in his career. And, I've talked extensively on my big board video about how I don't like Derek Queen's attitude, his work ethic, his conditioning. I don't believe in the jumper, and I really don't think that he's going to be able to hold up defensively as well, which means he's not going to be able to shoot, and he's going to have to play with another center, maybe at the 4. And I think there's a lot of positional problems for Derek Queen that I personally don't buy into. And then on the other end, I think Jeremiah Fears, who is beaming with potential for sure, but can't defend, can't really shoot, and as dynamic as he is, he's an absolute swing. Same thing with Derek Queen. I think they're very similar prospects in terms of what they have going for them and what they don't. And I think in terms of someone who, as a scout, loves draft archetypes and is a really big fan of the historical accuracy of certain types of players, this for me just doesn't work. Pretty low on it once again, like I said, and I think there's a lot going on in New Orleans other than these problems, and if I were them, I probably would have maybe selected a guy like Noah Asenge, 7th overall, maybe Carter Bryant, Kaman Maluach, those types of guys that I think are more role player types of guys who can try to fit in with a Trey Murphy, who I think is ascending into stardom. I guess they traded away CJ McCollum, but DeJounte Murray, for example, it just seems to me that Fears and Queen are going to be buried down the roster. And when you're trading up, giving away an unprotected first and taking 2 picks in the lottery, I don't get why they're going for those those high upside star swings when they already have those types of players. What they should be looking for is a more complementary piece, which is why I mentioned Maluach, Carter Bryant, even Cedric Coward, for example. Those types of players I think would have been better suited for what they're trying to develop. And I also just don't think Jordan Poole fits with them either. So there's a lot of issues going on in New Orleans. I'm confused. I'm sure you guys are too. But with that being said, this is the end of the video. So if you agree, disagree, have anything you want to say, leave it in the comments. I always respond to every single comment I get. And, I'm sure some of the things I've said on this video are controversial. So let me know what you think. And, thanks as always.